Welcome, everybody, for this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture. Today, we're going to be doing something really fun. I'm sure people have noticed that a running theme throughout the course of the Rising Tide Foundation presentations, a lot of the essays that we publish tend to focus on the question of universal culture. This doesn't mean some homogenous Borg, one-size-fits-all culture, of course. I hope people realize that, but that there are these attributes that make us all human first before any other secondary or tertiary aspect of what material component of what part of the world, what time frame we were born into, what skin color we have, what language we speak. These things that are beautiful differences that coexist with the fact that we are all fundamentally human, not armadillos, not bees, but human, with certain universal categories of human sentiments, of quality of the mind. These have certain ways of becoming better and of becoming stagnant and decaying. Understanding or developing an appreciation for some of these dynamics is the heart of understanding all universal history, geopolitics, conspiracies for good or for bad. And these concepts have been tackled at different times by great thinkers, stretching all over time and space. And so today, Uwe Elschner, who is a good friend of the Rising Tide Foundation, of Cynthia and myself, we've had a chance to get to know Uwe now for over a year, and both from his writings, his ability to analyze and to get at causal concepts, we have been extremely impressed. He manages a Substack called Never Again Is Now Global, which he founded when he was working with Vera Sharav. And it's a fantastic Substack. For those who are not yet subscribed, I'm going to put a link both in the chat box here, as well as in the description box when this video is uploaded. So anybody watching this on YouTube or whatever can just go to the description box and subscribe to Never Again Is Now Global on Substack. Uwe is going to tackle something that is very close to my heart, Schiller, and specifically Schiller's aesthetical concepts, which were tackled at a very important moment, a pivot in world history. And too few people have, I think, really given this very challenging but very rewarding text the proper time that it deserves, with a look as well to how Schiller was thinking as far as his appreciation for Confucius, his appreciation for other cultures at the same time. So Uwe, without me saying anything else, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Matt, for this kind introduction, and thank you everyone else for giving me the honor of speaking to you today. It is a huge honor. I admire the Rising Tide Foundation a lot. I've come to know the work of the Rising Tide Foundation now for quite some time. As Matt said, we got in contact via my work for Vera Sharav. And that work was, of course, Never Again Is Now Global, a film project and a book project, was quite sinister in the way that research was confronting me with very, very dark information about my country's past, about the history of the world, and so this is something which is, sorry, there was a prompt which was irritating. So this was quite dark and daunting in a way of very depressing. And Matt and Cynthia and the Rising Tide Foundation have widened my scope to the concept and to the importance of beauty, which I had not been aware of, I must say, prior to that, at least not to that extent which it deserves, and which I think is something which we all want to bring out into the world. So the concept of beauty for what it means to be human. Just a side note, I have been working inside and outside German politics for 25 years now. But I also started a kind of coaching practice for clients. And one of my claims on my, how do you say, advertisement missions there is to be fully human. Ganz Mensch sein is the term. And this work, which I've been doing now here with this talk on Schiller, really brought me in touch with this essence. So what it means to be really human, and um, how do we become human? Of course, this has been something which was introduced in many, many ways on a philosophical level by the work which many of your colleagues and co-presenters have been doing. And I would like just to mention a couple of them. One is here, Dr. Quan Le. I'm very grateful for the insight into Eastern Asian philosophy, which you have given, and this inspired me also to do this work, because by listening to this to your work, I have gradually become aware of certain similarities, or what I think are similarities. And so this is what I will try to present today. I also must say that this is work in progress. It is, I'm aware, it is quite a challenge to tackle Schiller and to tackle the philosophies of Confucius and Plato, or generally the humanities. So therefore, please bear with me. I'm not making the assertion that I have fully grasped it. It is something which I will continue to focus on and try to understand. But it is something which I also have come to realize that it is very, very well, it's beautiful in just reading and focusing on these concepts of philosophy and universal history. Universal history, this is my last remark before I started. I'm a trained historian, and Schiller, of course, has written also on the concept of universal history, what is and to what and do we study universal history. This of course has intrinsically to do with what we are going to be talking about today, and with philosophy in general. But this is also something which I'm very grateful for this having opened my mind to an extent which I hadn't been aware of before. So let me now try to share my screen. So I cannot shift the bar, which is on top of the full screen mode, but I think it should be okay. And this way, it's almost full screen. If it's okay with you,
We all approve.
okay, right. So as I said, what inspired me? So almost a year ago, I read I watched a presentation which Cynthia gave from Switzerland, I believe, and this was directly connected to my work with Vera Sharaf. So it was the issue of transhumanism, why H.G. Wells' World Brain and Yuval Harari's Hackable Human will not succeed, a study on the abolition of man. This was a very, very important talk for me personally, because it opened literally this talk opened my view on Schiller in this respect, because I hadn't been aware of it. In this talk, Cynthia closes with a quote from Schiller on beauty, which is of course a very famous quote. And then this is just one of a number of presentations by Dr. Quan Le, but this is also one which is very very beautiful and educative for me. So the poetic principle in the word of the I Ching, mankind's long journey to reason and beauty. I've also drawn from William Words's Reader's Guide to Schiller's Letters on the Aesthetical Education of Man, which I can highly recommend. And in case I should not really succeed in getting across the essence of the letters, there's something which you may want to look up yourself afterwards. And then last but not least, the lecture from Irene Eckert, so a friend from Germany, which I found also on the Rising Tide Foundation, Schiller versus the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And in this context, here is, of course, the quote from another of Cynthia's articles, which deals with the issue of counterculture and the importance of working to stop this movement to turn the ugly into beautiful and the beautiful into ugly, and to portray insanity as the new sanity, which of course is quite something at the center of the oligarchical strategy in trying to take over the world by dehumanizing our condition in terms of taking away a very essential part, and that is beauty. So this is then Friedrich Schiller. He was born in 1759 and died in 1805. He died at a very young age. I'm not going to go too much into his biography, but Schiller is somebody who is today, well, of course, he is known in Germany, but no one really understands what Schiller means. He is trivialized and banalized in the essence of his work. He's being spoken about as a romanticist, of course, and as a writer of the German nation, which, of course, in Germany is seen to be problematic because it was seen to paving the way for fascism, Nazism, and today for also for the rise of the new far right, which of course is totally fabricated and artificial, at least in its core, because of the deep state running the far right party in Germany. It has been for quite a while, a long time, which even the German Constitutional Court stated that it was the fact in 2003. But what Schiller really is, no one really knows. The German Culture Institute bears the name of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Schiller's friend. And so everyone is mainly focusing on Goethe and his great work, but that Schiller was someone who was very important also for Goethe, and that Goethe was someone who maybe, did not go to the full extreme as Schiller did in his thinking or in his speaking out and publishing. This is something which is not known by the German public. So today I will speak about Schiller the prophet. And this, of course, is derived from the Poet of Freedom and from the talk, or one of the talks of Quan Le, which I really appreciated, where he spoke about what is poetry. So the poet as a prophet, as a rishi, a shengren, and even as was then stated in the discussion, also the Hebrew and I think it was the Arabic. So the Nabi or Navi all means prophet. So a man who is able to see the future, a man of vision. And Schiller clearly was someone who was able to see the future, who was able to assess the present, his present, who also was able to understand history and the past. And he clearly was a man of vision. And in this way, he had the ear to hear the will of heaven, which was one of the titles which I put on the first slide. So stating the will of heaven. So you need to be able to hear the will of heaven to understand what is the essence of the information which we are receiving or which we are immersed in, and then also having the capacity, the mouth, to state it for the fellow human beings in a dignified, so that it's also a beautiful manner. And in this, he was open to the space of the divine dimension of timelessness, which is also something which I will try to show where this is also in the aesthetical letters, right? Truth, goodness, and beauty. Poetry, it was said, is total perception by total awareness. I really like this this very short programmatic phrase. And awareness has, of course, a great meaning also with regards to Schiller and the letters. So in my attempt to show that Schiller dealt with philosophical content or philosophical ideas, which had been also dealt with by Confucius and by Plato, was something which, of course, raised the question whether Schiller, in which way he was influenced or was aware of Confucius or Plato even only. So Plato, of course, he surely has been aware because he had an education himself, a humanist education, which of course drew on the Greek classic. Whether or not he knew Confucius, we can only assume. Schiller has published a piece on a Chinese princess, so Turandot. So therefore, he also was aware, clearly was aware of the Chinese civilization and culture in some way.
Uwe,
But yeah,
there's actually a beautiful little poem called Confucius that Schiller wrote, actually, on Confucius.
wonderful. So
I'll send it in the chat box where people can check it out.
thank you very much, Matthew, Matt, for this amendments, because, as I said, I have only started to really get to know Schiller. I've bought myself a complete works of Schiller as well as a complete works of Plato after I understood that that this is something which really had been forgotten in my own education, and I have not read all the poetry and not even all the plays, of course. But now, so it was not quite clear in which way he was aware of it. He has written a poet, as Matt just said. But clearly, what is evident is that Schiller was influenced by Leibniz. Leibniz, who was a German polymath or a European polymath of German origin. In fact, he was in the Kingdom of Hanover, which is quite near where I live now, and the University of Hanover bears Leibniz's names. But of course, it's totally void of his thinking today. But Leibniz, he was intimately acquainted with China, and he tried to bridge the continents from Europe to Asia, from the Far East to the Far West, and he tried to get the Russian Tsar to engage in it, because the German princes, they were not really interested in this, which was a matter of of frustration for Leibniz. So Leibniz died in the 17, I think it was 1717 or 1719, early 18th century. Schiller hadn't been born by then, but Mendelssohn, so Moses Mendelssohn, he also was very instrumental in keeping the work of Leibniz alive, and therefore also the general idea of classics and classicisms. So therefore it is quite obvious that Schiller was also aware of, at least to some extent, of this greater context. But this is not the question, I think, which we need to really think about, because it doesn't really matter whether he drew on the same idea, knowing about Plato and especially Confucius in the same respect, but it is rather a proof of concept for the idea of a universal reason, creative reason, which exists and which is something which exists outside of us, outside of man, and which we can access and work on individually. Each of us, provided we get the right education, encouraging our creative thinking. Okay, this is just a slide with two quotes. So one is from one of the talks which I have cited, where Conley said, "True art is the door that will bring us to playful exploration." So the dialecticon, it was about the similarities between Plato and Confucius in the context of which this quote was mentioned. And then this also relates to Schiller's idea of the of play and of what it is that makes us human, and which is the playful drive, or so the playful impulse. There are various ways to translate this word, Spieltrieb. So it's the playful impulse in this translation. Man should only play with beauty, and he should only play with beauty. He should play only with beauty. Man plays only when he's a man in the fullest sense of the word, and he's only a complete man when he plays. So this is, of course, something which sounds like going around in circles, but it is quite true and very deep, that and it invites us to really look deeper into what it is that Schiller was talking about in detail. So the concept of time and timelessness is also something which plays a huge role, both with Confucius as well as with Plato, as this slide will show from one of the talks of Quan, and it describes the I Ching, or the 6 lines of the 6 levels of awareness, which is the journey of the soul, if I get it right. So it is something which is present as well in Chinese, Eastern Asian philosophy, as well as in the Greek philosophy, where we have the first 3 levels, which is the animal kingdom, and then the upper 3, upper triagram in the I Ching is the divine kingdom, and there is the time in the first 3 levels, the time dimension, and the timeless reality in the upper 3 levels. And this plays a role also with regard to Schiller and his concept of beauty, not in this sense of the six levels, but in the awareness about time and timelessness, which is something which he also thought about and wrote about quite clearly. Right. So here we have the forms of time, the various forms of time in both Greek and Eastern Asian philosophy. Chronos in Greek, cyclos, kairos. I have not dared to try myself in the Chinese expressions for those, but time. This is something which is quite interesting and quite helpful, at least for my understanding of this whole concept, which also Schiller wrote about with the aesthetical letters. It is, of course, the definition of time being the reality created by greed, fear, anger, or unawareness, and the kairos, or the shoe, being the channel towards timelessness, so the divine dimension, and which of course has the three values: truth, goodness, and beauty. And beauty is, of course, that which Schiller speaks about. The aesthetical letters were written in response to the events unfolding in the French Revolution. So Schiller, of course, as you know, had been a great admirer of the American Revolution, and he also was very hopeful about the French Revolution when it began, about the Declaration of the Human Rights, and the humanist process of getting a how do you say, a constitution, and getting rid of the absolutism of the time. But of course, it failed. The Jacobite terror ended all hopes, and in this way, the French Revolution also failed in Schiller's view. He was quite desperate, and the aesthetical letters is something which is the direct response to the tragedies and the terror which the people saw at the time. So it was published in 1794, 1905, depending on what kind of publication you look at. It was written in the form of letters to the Duke of Schleswig, Holstein-Augustenburg, which is a principality in the north of Germany, northern German Danish area, who was a supporter of Schiller, and so Schiller paid his tribute for addressing these thoughts to his benefactor. But it was also something which was written in the form of this kind of dialogue, in a kind of Platonic tradition, so that it helps the reader to better understand the various levels of discourse which are represented in the letters. And of course, this event, the French Revolution, was a historic event in the sense that it was one of the decisive moments in time, which the I Ching also tries to teach to any leader, to be able to handle it with a clear mind, a reasonable mind, and void of fear, greed, anger, or unawareness. And clearly, this was not what was going on in France. So there was an abundance of fear, of anger, and of greed, and of course of unawareness, which was directly leading to this catastrophe. And Schiller tried to make sense of how to really get to freedom, and to a human dignified life. So this is the I Ching which Leibniz owned. Leibniz, as I said, was very, very much inspired by Confucian philosophy, which he obtained from his conversations um, with monks who had traveled to China and whom he met in Rome and elsewhere. And so this is something. This is the I Ching from Leibniz estate, a very beautiful uh, image or icon, and so just for you to get an impression of what it is I was referring to here. So maybe someone could read this quote, if you don't mind, who would volunteer to read this quote from Confucius in the Analects? Someone?
I could do it if there's no other hands.
Just go
I
ahead.
don't mind doing it.
Oh, okay. Got a Jenny. All right, go for it.
My young friends, why are you not engaging yourselves with poetry? Poetry is congenial to stimulate the imagination. She lets us view life in a contemplative mirror, thus cleansing our emotions. She awakens social nobleness. She arouses anger against injustice and deceitfulness. She permits the emergence in families and in the state of intentions for moral actions, and otherwise broadens our knowledge of the whole organic world. He who wants to be a scholarly person should read poetry in order to develop in himself a soul oriented to truth and beauty. Then read the moral laws in order to stay on the true path, and learn music to be able to harmonically ensoul yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is from the Analects of Confucius, and it is something which is directly, I find, related to also what Schiller was trying to get across with his letters on the aesthetical education. These letters, they are, as I said, they are not very much known. I think I can say this in this form. I mean, they definitely have not been known to me, but I think I was quite representative for the average German in this way. They are not known. You can get them in any bookstore. They even have an interpretation from a scholar of Schiller attached to it in the form of a book. But this introduction usually will completely distort the idea of what Schiller really has been trying to get across, and some of this we will be able to detect easily when they talk about that Schiller is encouraging us to do art, whatever art we would try to do. So this is the first telltale sign that they have no idea, or maybe they have an idea of what the power of the text and of the philosophy really is, but they try to distract from it by even distorting the very object of beauty and of art, which Schiller has quite precise ideas about what it is he is talking about. And we will maybe come to this. But what I would like to point out here is that the kind of German which he uses is, of course, very old, right? It's 250 years old almost. And it is difficult or it has been difficult for me, at least I must say, to really understand it. It's a very dense text in old poetic German. And one of this is when he talks about form, which is not a term which we would usually use today. But of course, this is something which is closely connected to Platonic philosophy, right? He draws on this concept of form, which is from eidos, idea, and which means something to be discovered or an archetype, right? The Latin word idea is derived from this Platonic definition of eidos, of form, and it means originally it meant a Platonic archetype. So that's how our use of the word idea, and in German it would be Idee, is coming from. It is also something which has been used also by Aristotle. For example, in his Metaphysics, their form is opposed to matter, and this kind of opposition is also used by Schiller. So therefore, it is something which may indicate that Schiller may have not been totally aware about the different approach of philosophy between Aristotle and Plato. I'm not familiar with Schiller's thinking in a deeper way, but he writes about Greek and classics in a way which makes it possible for me to even assume that he may not have been aware himself about this attempt to even rid Plato of the power of Platonic philosophy by way of getting Aristotle to dominate the Greek philosophical teachings later in the Renaissance and going forward. And at least to my impression, that's completely the case today. So Aristotle is very prevalent, and Plato is somebody who is not very much known about, and if he's known about, it is in a derogatory way for apparently being a precursor of all kinds of weird ideas, which can only be, results from not knowing Plato from reading him first hand. Another reason why I got myself a complete works of Plato from an old edition. Anyway, so this is something which I found very interesting, and I was bold enough to say that Schiller derives his form from Plato directly, at least in the way it is meant in his talk, in his paper. Right. So this is again the another version of the timeless dimension, the journey of the soul, which of course refers directly to the Confucian way of describing the journey of the soul and discovering the universal laws from a young age to an old age, which Plato also has in his writings. Right. So Schiller, in his letter, in the publication, he starts by, he starts quite defensively by saying, well, I understand that everyone is talking about the political events of the time and how we could reach at freedom, but I would like to really focus on beauty and arts, and this may be this may seem odd to you, dear reader, dear Count Schleswig-Holstein-Augustenburg. And so he asks, is it not somewhat untimely to seek a code of law for the aesthetic world, while the affairs of the moral world raise matters of much more direct interest, and the spirit of philosophical inquiry is expressly challenged by the present circumstances to address the most perfect of all works of art, the construction of a true political liberty? And then he continues a bit further down. If one is to resolve this political problem, one must in practice take the aesthetic path, for it is through beauty that we arrive at freedom. And this, as I said earlier, this was the quote which really triggered me when I followed Cynthia's presentation about H.G. Wells and Yuval Noah Harari, and the positive outlook which she gave in this talk. So this is a very famous quote from this letters that we arrive at freedom, so at the political idea, only if we really understand what importance beauty has and what beauty really is. Okay, so last but not least, in terms of the obvious analogies between the aesthetical letters and older texts and concepts of philosophy, this is, of course, a representation, a graphic representation of the idea of the chariot and the charioteer and the dark horse and the white horse, which is something which Plato uses frequently in his writings in various ways. And in this way, I think it is also something which can be seen in this concept of beauty, that Schiller makes the case that there are two distinct and two essential drives within the human nature. So that's the form drive. So it's the reason, and it's the need to make sense and to understand the laws, or even to create moral laws about life. And then the sensual, maybe say some people say primitive or animalistic drive of the senses, of the the empirical, the rational, no, not the rational, the physical senses and impressions, which is true. And Schiller goes on to explain that, and in some way we have seen this. So it is you and I over the past 4 years, we may have come to a conclusion that this two kind of states or of characteristics have been present around us, where we have people who were completely in their rational capacity, explaining how what was going on during what was called the pandemic was not making sense, and then we have people who were full of fear and in their complete emotional state. And this also was vice versa about those who are in fear about democracy and those who trusted the rational and reasonable ideas of how to contain the crisis by mandates and stuff like this. And in a way, this is, I think, is quite true that we have those traits, and that this is Schiller asserts it is beauty which leads the chariot, so which leads the human being out of this confrontation, this calamity. So this relates to the question again here, whether it is not something that should not have any importance now, which Schiller asked. Confucius, in his Duties of a Gentleman, as I understood it from following the talks, also said that in order to put the world in order, we must first put the nation in order, and to put the nation in order, we must first put the family in order, and in order to put the family in order, we must first cultivate our personal life. We must first set our hearts right. So we must really deal with beauty and poetry, as we've already heard from the analects. We must really cultivate ourselves in order to achieve higher things. And this is also something which is, of course, the essence of the whole journey of the soul, of trying to understand what it is to be living in this world and to make sense of this. Another quote here from Mencius: if you let the people enjoy beauty with you, so this is an answer to a prince or to a nobleman who confesses to Mencius that he is obsessed with beauty, and that it is something which he has he's regretful about. And Mencius apparently answered, if you let the people enjoy beauty with you, you cannot fail to be a good ruler, right? So beauty is not the problem. It is, if you keep beauty from everyone else, then it is a problem. Okay, so maybe we should stop here first for some questions which may have arisen. I have not been able to follow the chat. I can see that there are some number of comments, but I'm not sure whether there have been questions, or maybe you have questions which you haven't put in the chat already.
So far in the chat, it's mostly been me sharing reference links to all sorts of things that you touch upon. But no questions have emerged in the chat. If somebody does have a spontaneous question, now would be a small window before Uwe gets back on track. Small window closing. And closed. All right, Uwe, it's all yours.
Okay. Okay. So for the rest of this, I have now chosen some excerpts of the letters, which I suggest we read in the way that someone volunteers to read it, and we continue our journey through the 27 letters altogether, or at least some of them, in order to get an impression of what it is he deals with in detail. Someone volunteering?
I'll do it. I'll do it.
Magdalena.
Okay. What we must chiefly bear in mind, then, is that physical society in time must never for a moment cease to exist, while moral society as idea is in the process of being formed. That for the sake of man's moral dignity, his actual existence must never be jeopardized. When the craftsman has a timepiece to repair, he can let its wheels run down. But the living clockwork of the state must be repaired while it is still striking. It is a question of changing the revolving wheel while it still revolves. For this reason, a support must be looked for which will ensure the continuance of society and make it independent of the natural state which is to be abolished.
Thank you. So this is, of course, pointing to the fact, Schiller gives an explanation why he is very cautious in giving support to any kind of revolutionary idea before the people are really ready to really handle the shoe situation, which clearly would be a very important moment in time to do this. So, and this is something where he says the society, the state, is something which can never cease. So he speaks about the state of nature, which is something which has evolved from necessity, but which is not something which is a state of reason. Clearly, this is the situation prior to the French Revolution, for example, or even to the American Revolution. The American Revolution succeeded in getting the transition. The French failed, and so Schiller makes the point that it failed because there was not the adequate support to stabilize society as such, and that's why it would have failed. He continues. Would you please continue, Magdalena, or or someone else?
Magdalena, you can keep it going.
Hold, sorry, I just had the mute on. Okay. It would therefore be a question of abstracting from man's physical character its arbitrariness, and from his moral character its freedom, of making the first conformable to laws, and the second dependent upon sense impressions, of removing the former somewhat further from matter, and bringing the latter somewhat closer to it. And all this with the aim of bringing into being a third character, which, kin to both the others, might prepare the way for a transition from the rule of mere force to the rule of law, and which, without in any way impeding the development of moral character, might, on the contrary, serve as a pledge in the sensible world of a morality as yet unseen.
Thanks. Sorry? Okay. So so this is his continuation of the reasoning that one would have to really go about very reasonably in order to arrive at freedom. In the fourth letter, so this quote we heard was from the third. The fourth letter out of 27 is something where I find he directly refers to Kant, and he begins the first letter by apparently paying homage to Kant, and Schiller was in contact with Kant, but the respect which he expressed was at least quite polite and maybe also veiled of a distinct criticism, which not I, but also other readers, such as William Words, see in this. And here is a proof, I think, for this criticizing or opposition to Kant. Who would like to?
I can continue if you want me to.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. But the will of man stands completely free between duty and inclination, and no physical compulsion can or should encroach upon this sovereign right of his personality. If, then, man is to retain his power of choice, and yet at the same time be a reliable link in the chain of causality, this can only be brought about through both these motive forces, inclination and duty, producing completely identical results in the world of phenomena. through the content of his volition remaining the same, whatever the difference in form. That is to say, through impulse being sufficiently in harmony with reason to qualify as universal legislator.
Thank you. Here we have it. It's a very direct criticism of the Kant's imperative, where he makes it a matter of duty to forgo certain choices, which Schiller says will never succeed, because in this way the essential would be dominated by the reason. And here in the same letter there is a reference to Confucian and Platonic thinking, and I will read it for myself now, to speed up things, because I do have quite a number of slides to come. One can, however, imagine two different ways in which man existing in time can coincide with man as idea, and in consequence, just as many ways in which the state can assert itself in individuals, either by the ideal man suppressing empirical man and the state annulling the individuals, or else by the individual himself becoming the state, and man in time being ennobled to the stature of man as idea. So I find it interesting that this is a reference to man existing in time, the concept of time again, the need to go on the journey of the soul towards timelessness, to the timeless dimension, which would be the man as idea, who would himself become the state, and thus ennoble the stature of man as an idea by manifesting as such. And this is the other perspective which Schiller opens here. But man can be at odds with himself in two ways, either as savage when feeling predominates over principle, or as barbarian when principle destroys feeling. The savage despises civilization and acknowledges nature as a sovereign mistress. The barbarian derides and dishonors nature, but more contemptible than the savage as often as not continues to be the slave of his slave. The man of culture makes a friend of nature and honors her freedom, whilst curbing only her caprice. Wholeness of character must therefore be present in any people capable and worthy of exchanging a state of compulsion for a state of freedom. So this is something quite fundamental here, where Schiller says we should not attempt to achieve or to strive for freedom unless we ourselves have really understood what it means to be free. And the issue of freedom will come up later as he develops his ideas. So then letters 5 and 6, he essentially says we are not where we believe to be, or those of us who think we should concentrate on manifesting this political idea now where we are. Schiller says it's too early to go about political freedom. We lack education. And just a very tiny quote from the 6th letter: the dead letter takes the place of living understanding, and a good memory is a safer guide than imagination and feeling. So this is something which today, at least in German schools, but I believe in schools everywhere, is really the principle of learning, as opposed to a Platonic way of creative thinking and reasoning and learning by asking questions. We only learn forms and dead letters. Successes have been achieved, Schiller acknowledges, but they are owed to exploitation and violation of human destiny. Quote, but can man really be destined to miss himself for the sake of any purpose whatsoever? Should nature, for the sake of her own purposes, be able to rob us of a completeness which reason, for the sake of hers, enjoins upon us? It must therefore be wrong if the cultivation of individual powers involves the sacrifice of wholeness, or rather, however much the law of nature tends in that direction, it must be open to us to restore by means of a higher art the totality of our nature, which the arts themselves have destroyed. So here we see it very clearly that Schiller has a very, very distinct understanding of what it means to be human and to living in a humane society. Letter 7 is just one short quote about the character of the age must therefore first lift itself out of its deep degradation. So the deep degradation which Schiller saw at his time, and which I think can also be identified in our times today. On the one hand, emancipate itself from the blind forces of nature. On the other hand, return to her simplicity, truth, and fullness. It is a task for more than 1 century, right? So this is just an impression of how aware Schiller was that this task is quite an ongoing and not easy to achieve. Okay, a quote from letter 8. Reason has accomplished all that she can accomplish by discovering the law and establishing it. Its execution demands a resolute will and ardor of feeling. If truth is to be victorious in a conflict with forces, she must herself first become a force and appoint some drive to be her champion in the realm of phenomena. For drives are the only motive forces in the sensible world. If she has hitherto displayed so little of her conquering power, this was due not to the intellect, which was powerless to unveil her, but to the heart, which closed itself against her, and to the drive, which refused to act on her behalf. So here we have the idea of drives, which are the motivative forces in the sensible world as opposed to the rational world. What we can identify as rational, as sensible, as rational and needs to be something which needs to be acted upon in the sensible world. So this drive has yet to be developed, Schiller says. And here you see my note where I wrote episteme, so the Platonic term of the journey of the soul to strive for epistemological awareness and maturity. People prefer the twilight of obscure ideas, where feeling is given full rein and fancy can fashion at will convenient images to the rays of truth, which put to flight the fond delusions of their dreams. It is on precisely these illusions which the unwelcome light of knowledge is meant to dissipate, that they have founded the whole edifice of their happiness. How can they be expected to pay so dearly for a truth which begins by depriving them of all they hold dear? They would first have to be wise in order to love wisdom, a truth already felt by him who gave philosophy her name, sapere aude. The development of man's capacity for feeling is therefore the more urgent need of our age, not merely because it can be a means of making better insights effective for life, but precisely because it provides the impulse for bettering our insights. Right? So this is also something which applies directly to our world today, where we have the counterculture running rampant on collective awareness, trying to put delusions into people's minds, which of course a truth will have to destroy, and therefore it is something which people will will resist where they are at this moment in time. And how we get them to understand it is the question. In letter 9, art, like science, is absolved from all positive constraint and from all conventions introduced by man. Both rejoice in absolute immunity from human arbitrariness. The political legislator may put their territory out of bounds. He cannot rule within it. He can prescribe the lover of truth. Truth itself will prevail. He can humiliate the artist, but art he cannot falsify. True, nothing is more common than for both science as well as art to pay homage to the spirit of the age, or for creative minds to accept the critical standards of prevailing taste. In epochs where character becomes rigid and obdurate, we find science keeping a strict watch over its frontiers and art moving in the heavy shackles of rules. In those where it becomes unnerved and flabby, science will strive to please and art to gratify. For whole centuries, thinkers and artists will do their best to submerge truth and beauty in the depth of a degraded humanity. It is they themselves who are drowned there, while truth and beauty, with their own indestructible vitality, struggle triumphantly to the surface. So bear in mind, this was written 250 years ago almost, and I find it very, very up to date today. Schiller develops this idea of an artist and what he or she should do in this 9th letter. The artist is indeed the child of his age, but woe to him if he is at the same time its ward, or worse, still its minion. But how is the artist to protect himself against the corruption of the age, which besets him on all sides? By disdaining its opinion. And he continues, to the young friend of truth and beauty, who would inquire of me how, despite all the opposition of his century, he is to satisfy the noble impulses of his heart, I would make answer. Live with your century, but do not be its creature. Work for your contemporaries, but create what they need, not what they praise. Without sharing their guilt, yet share with noble resignation in their punishment, and bow your head freely beneath the yoke which they find as difficult to dispense with as to bear. By the steadfast courage with which you disdain their good fortune, you will show them that it is not through cowardice that you consent to share their sufferings. Think of them as they ought to be when called upon to influence them. Think of them as they are when tempted to act on their behalf. In seeking their approval, appeal to what is best in them, but in devising their happiness, recall them as they are at their worst. Then your own ability will awaken theirs, and their unworthiness not defeat your purpose. The seriousness of your principles will frighten them away, but in the play of your semblance, they will be prepared to tolerate them. For their taste is purer than their heart, and it is here that you must lay hold of the timorous fugitive. In vain will you assail their precepts, in vain condemn their practice, but on their leisure hours you can try your shaping hand. Banish from their pleasures caprice, frivolity, and coarseness, and imperceptibility, and imperceptibly you will banish these from their actions, and eventually from their inclinations too. Surround them, wherever you meet them, with the great and noble forms of genius, and encompass them about with the symbol of perfection until semblance conquer reality and art triumph over nature. So this is one of the passages which is completely written out of all introductions, which I have at least seen in the versions of Schiller's letters up for sale today. So this deep reminder to everyone who tries to be an artist, to do art, of really strive for perfection, is something which is completely banalized, and as long as someone calls it art, just go about it, even if it's just splashes of paint on a canvas. No matter, it's art, and Schiller encourages you. No, he does not. He really speaks to the conscience of the artist. Here is again a quote which I think we have already heard. It's the Confucius, apart from the Analects. I think it really pertains to also this letter of Schiller's. Okay, then in letter 10, we get to the concept of beauty in this sense. This pure rational concept of beauty of which he speaks, if such could be found, would therefore, since it cannot be derived from any actual case, but rather itself corrects and regulates our judgment of every actual case, it would have to be discovered by a process of abstraction and deduced from the sheer potentialities of our sensor-rational nature. In a single word, beauty would have to be shown to be a necessary condition of human being. From now on, then, we must live our thoughts to the pure concept of human nature. And since experience never shows us human nature as such, but only individual human beings in individual situations, we must endeavor to discover from all these individual and changing manifestations that which is absolute and unchanging, and by the rejection of all contingent limitations, apprehend the necessary conditions of their existence. True, this transcendental way will lead us out of the familiar circle of phenomenal existence, away from the living presence of things, and cause us to tarry for a while upon the barren and naked land of abstractions. But we are, after all, struggling for a firm basis of knowledge which nothing shall shake. And he who never ventures beyond actuality will never win the prize of truth. So this is also, I think, very poetical and beautifully written, even in this translation. And this reminds me of pointing out that there are, of course, several translations. The one which I've used here is not the best. It is, but it is one which is I was able to really copy paste without having to write it all up or saving the whole book as images first to get it computerized. So therefore, there is a difference also in translation, but as I said, it is even a difference for a native speaker to understand Schiller, and you have to go about it quite diligently to appreciate the poetic nature of his writings, of his philosophy, because it is his philosophy. Letter 11. When abstraction rises to the highest level, so this is a new section of the letters. He has spoken about art now, and now he's going to speak about human nature. And he defines this. I'm starting here in this first paragraph of letter 11. When abstraction rises to the highest level it can possibly attain, it arrives at two ultimate concepts before which it must halt and recognize that here it has reached its limits. It distinguishes in man something that endures and something that constantly changes. That which endures it calls his person, that which changes his condition. The person, therefore, must be its own ground, for what persists cannot proceed from what changes. And so we would in the first place have an idea of absolute being grounded upon itself, that is to say, freedom. The condition, on the other hand, must have a ground other than itself. It must, since it does not owe its existence to the person, i.e., is not absolute, proceed from something. And so we would, in the second place, have the condition of all contingent being or becoming, that is to say, time. So I picked this quote, of course, because it has a reference to the idea of the chronos and kairos idea of the various forms of time, which also have a relevance for the journey of towards the awareness of the divine in our human being. He continues on in letter 11, the material of activity, therefore, on the reality which the supreme intelligence creates out of itself, man has first to receive. And he does, in fact, receive it by way of perception, as something existing outside of him in space, and as something changing within him in time. This changing material within him is accompanied by his never-changing I, and to remain perpetually himself throughout all change, to convert all that he apprehends into experience, i.e., to organize it into a unity which has significance, and to transform all his modes of existence in time into a law for all times. This is the injunction laid upon him by his rational nature. Only inasmuch as he changes does he exist. Only inasmuch as he remains unchangeable does he exist. Man, imagined in his perfection, would therefore be the constant unity which remains eternally itself amidst the floods of change. So I encourage you to really take some time to read this section of the letters. So the 11th, 12th, and 13th letter are really, really deep spiritual philosophy, which will take some time to fully appreciate, but which are really, really, at least to me, very close to what I understand to be at the core of Platonic and Confucian thinking. A disposition to the divine man does indubitably carry within him in his personality. The way to the divine, if we can call a way that which never leads to the goal, is opened to him through the senses. From this there proceed two contrary challenges to man. So this is then a huge leap to the end of the text. From this there proceed two contrary challenges to man, the two fundamental laws of his sensor-rational nature. The first insists upon absolute reality. He is to turn everything which is mere form into world, and make all his potentialities fully manifest. The second insists upon absolute formality. He is to destroy everything in himself which is mere world, and bring harmony into all his changes. In other words, he is to externalize all that is within him, and to give form to all that is outside him. Both these tasks, conceived in the highest fulfillment, lead us back to that concept of Godhead from which I started, or I would prefer to that concept of divinity from which I started. So this is an issue of translation. But in any case, I think it becomes clear that he really tries to get a grasp or to get across to the reader, to his audience, that it is extremely important to understand the structure of human being which is, I regret I have not the proper language to get it across in this lecture, but which is also, I think, quite quite familiar to, as I said, Platonic and Confucian thinking. Letter 12. Towards the accomplishment of this twofold task. So that is the one which he had mentioned here at the end of the letter 11, the two fundamental laws of his sensual rational nature, right? This twofold task of giving reality to the necessity within and subjecting to the law of necessity the reality without, we are impelled by two opposing forces which, since they drive us to the realization of their object, may aptly be termed drives. The first of these, which I will call the sensus drive, proceeds from the physical existence of man or his sensus nature. Its business is to set within the limits of time and to turn him into matter, not to provide him with the matter, since that, of course, would presuppose a free activity of the person capable of receiving such matter and distinguish it from the self as from that which it persists, which persists. By matter in this context, we understand nothing more than change or reality which occupies time. Consequently, this drive demands that we shall be change, that time shall have a content. This state, which is nothing but time occupied by content, is called sensation, and it is through this alone that physical existence makes itself known. The second of the two drives, which we may call the formal drive, proceeds from the absolute existence of man, or from his rational nature, and is intent on giving him the freedom to bring harmony into the diversity of his manifestations and to affirm his persons among all his changes of condition. Again, this is very, very deep, and I mean, if we would do a reading of the letters, we would have to spend several sessions, reading sessions. So therefore, this can only be a short excerpt of what I find is very, very profound and deep philosophical thinking, poetic thinking, so visionary writing about human nature. Where then the formal drive holds sway and the pure object acts within us, we experience the greatest enlargement of being. All limitations disappear, and from the mere unit of quantity to which the poverty of his senses reduced him, man has raised himself to a unity of ideas, embracing the whole realm of phenomena. During this operation, we are no longer in time. Time, with its whole never-ending succession, is in us. We are no longer individuals, we are species. The judgment of all minds is expressed through our own, the choice of all hearts is represented by our action. And this is the state which he has said is conditional for any nation to be able to achieve political freedom. In letter 13, he tries to solve something which may seem an opposition. At first sight, nothing could seem more diametrically opposed than the tendencies of these two drives, the one pressing for change, the other for changelessness. And yet, it is these two drives which, between them, exhaust our concept of humanity and make a third fundamental drive which might possibly reconcile the two, a completely unthinkable concept. How, then, are we to restore the unity of human nature, which seems to be utterly destroyed by this primary and radical opposition? Right? So this is, of course, a question that arises when you read this at first, because you think, well, if it is essential, those two drives, and which, if they are opposed, but if it's only those two, how then can you how can you resolve this? Schiller continues, it is true that their tendencies do indeed conflict with each other, but, and this is the point to note, not in the same objectives, and things which never make contact cannot collide. The sensuous drive does indeed demand change, but it does not demand the extension of this to the person and its domain. It does not demand a change of principles. Sorry. The sensuous drive does indeed demand change, but it does not demand the extension of this to the person. And its domain does not demand the change of principles. The formal drive insists on unity and persistence, but it does not require the condition to be stabilized as well as the person. It does not require identity of sensation. The two are therefore not by nature opposed, and if they nevertheless seem to be so, it is because they have become opposed through a wanton transgression of nature, through mistaking their nature and function and confusing their spheres of operation. Right? So there it is. It is not really something which is opposed, even though people make it seem opposed, or we only read it superficially. We will get the impression it is. Both drives therefore need to have limits set to them, and inasmuch as they can be thought of as energies, need to be relaxed as the sense drive. So that it does not encroach upon the domain of law, the formal drive so that it does not encroach on that of feeling. But the relaxing of the sense drive must in no wise be the result of physical impotence or blunted feeling, which never merits anything but contempt. It must be an act of the free choice, an activity of the person, which by its moral intensity moderates that of the senses, and by mastering impressions robs them of their depths only in order to give them increased surface. It is character which must set bounds to temperament, for it is only to profit the mind that sense may go short. In the same way, the relaxing to the formal drive must not be the result of spiritual impotence or flabbiness of thought or will, for this would only degrade man. It must, if it is to be at all praiseworthy, spring from abundance of feelings and sensation. Sense herself must, as with triumphant power, remain mistress of her own domain, and resist the violence which the mind, by its usurping tactics, would fain inflict upon her. In a single word, personality must keep the senses drive within its proper bounds, and receptivity or nature must do the same with the formal drive. So this is something in quite complicated language, where he said these drives cannot be, as Kant has suggested, cannot be one cannot dominate over the other. So the rational, the duty cannot dominate over the sensual, because it will lead to catastrophe, in that it will take away that what makes us human. We have to reconcile it, and it is through beauty that we are gradually able to reconcile those two. Such reciprocal relation between the two drives is admittedly but a task enjoined upon us by reason, a problem which man is only capable of solving completely in the perfect consummation of his existence. It is, in the most precise sense of the word, the idea of his human nature, hence something infinite, to which in the course of time he can approximate ever more closely, but without ever being able to reach it. The sense drive demands that there shall be change, and that time shall have a content. The form drive demands that time shall be annulled, and that there shall be no change. That drive, therefore, in which both the others work in concert, permit me for the time being, until I have justified the term, to call it the play drive. The play drive, therefore, would be directed towards annulling time within time, reconciling becoming with absolute being, and change with identity. So in this letter 14, he introduces the play drive, which we saw already at the beginning of the slides, and it is quite an important concept, because this is not the area of the two essential contents, but of the drives which will harmonize the two essential concepts. And this is the play drive. This is why it's so important to really focus on beauty. Letter 15. The object of the sense drive, expressed in a general concept we call life, in the widest sense of this term, a concept designating all material being and all that is immaterial immediately present to the senses. The object of the form drive, expressed in a general concept we call form, both in the figurative and in the literal sense of the word, a concept which includes all the formal qualities of things and all the relations of these to our thinking faculties. The object of the play drive, represented in the general schema, may therefore be called living form, a concept serving to designate all the aesthetic qualities of phenomena and, in a word, what in the widest sense of the term we call beauty. Man, as we know, is neither exclusively matter nor exclusively mind. Beauty, as the consummation of his humanity, can therefore be neither exclusively life nor exclusively form. Not mere life, as acute observers adhering too closely to the testimony of experience have maintained, and to which the taste of our age would fain degrade it, not mere form, as it has been adjudged by philosophers whose speculations led them too far away from experience, or by artists who, philosophizing on beauty, let themselves be too exclusively guided by the need of their craft. It is the object common to both drives, that is to say, the object of the play drive. The beautiful is neither to be mere life nor mere form, but living form, i.e. beauty, for it imposes upon man the double law of absolute formality and absolute reality. Consequently, reason also makes the pronouncement, with beauty man shall only play, and it is with beauty only that he shall play. For to mince matters no longer, man only plays when he is in the fullest sense of the word a human being, and he is only fully a human being where he plays. So this is the famous quote which we saw up above. This is a jump to the 19th letter. There is in man no power than his will, and his inner freedom can only be destroyed by that which destroys man himself, namely death, or anything that robs him of consciousness. Only of him who is conscious of himself can we demand reason, that is, absolute consistency and universality of consciousness. Prior to that, he is not a human being at all, and no act of humanity can be expected of him. Okay, I chose this because here we have the term of the concept of consciousness quite prominently stressed, that this is something which is essential, and poetry, as mentioned at the beginning, is also something which will raise our consciousness, which will develop our consciousness. So therefore, it follows that we have to use, for example, poetry, but also other forms of beauty, to develop our consciousness in order that we can that we can demand reason, and that we can really develop our humanity. The senses drive awakens with our experience of life, with the beginning of our individuality. The rational drive with our experience of law, with the beginning of our personality. And only at this point, when both have come into existence, is the basis of man's humanity established. Until this has happened, everything in him takes place according to the law of necessity. But now the hand of nature is withdrawn from him, and it is up to him to vindicate the humanity which she, nature, implanted and opened up within him. That is to say, as soon as two opposing fundamental drives are active within him, both lose their compulsion, and the opposition of two necessities gives rise to freedom. That freedom cannot be affected by anything whatsoever follows from our very notion of freedom. But that freedom is itself an effect of nature, this word taken in the widest sense, and not the work of man, that it can therefore also be furthered or thwarted by natural means, follows no less inevitably from what has just been said. Freedom arises only when man is a complete being, when both his fundamental drives are fully developed. It will therefore be lacking as long as he is incomplete, as long as one of the two drives is excluded, and it should be capable of being restored by anything which gives him back his completeness. Okay, so this again is directly, I think, in response to Kant and his philosophy. In the 20th letter, he talks about aesthetic determination, which is, of course, a concept where he revisits the evolution of man's life, or of man's being, which begins before awareness has arisen. So determination happens without free will, and therefore, in order to have it reversed, we need a new form of determination, and this is something which will follow in the 20th and following letters. By means of aesthetic culture, therefore, the personal worth of a man, or his dignity, inasmuch as this can depend solely upon himself, remains completely indeterminate, and nothing more is achieved by it than that he is henceforth enabled by the grace of nature to make himself what he will, that the freedom to be what he ought to be is completely restored to him. So this is the very, very essential function of beauty and aesthetic education. But precisely thereby something infinite is achieved. Or as soon as we recall that it was precisely of this freedom that he was deprived by the one-sided constraint of nature in the field of sensation and by the exclusive authority of reason in the realm of thought, then we are bound to consider the power which is restored to him in the aesthetic mode as the highest of all bounties, as the gift of humanity itself. True, he possesses this humanity in potentia before every determinate condition into which he can conceivably enter, but he loses it in practice with every determinate condition in which he does enter. And if he is to pass into a condition of an opposite nature, this humanity must be restored to him each time anew through the life of the aesthetic. It is then not just poetic license, but philosophical truth when we call beauty our second creatress. For although it only offers us the possibility of becoming human beings, and for the rest leaves it to our own free will to decide how far we wish to make this a reality, it does in this resemble our first creatress, nature, which likewise conferred upon us nothing more than the power of becoming human, leaving the use and practice of that power to our own free will and decision. Because it takes under its protection no single one of man's faculties to the exclusion of the others, it favors each and all of them without distinction, and it favors no single one more than another, for the simple reason that it is the ground of possibility of them all. Every other way of exercising its functions endows the psyche with some special aptitude, but only at the cost of some special limitation. The aesthetic alone leads to the absence of all limitation. Here alone do we feel reft out of time, and our human nature expresses itself with a purity and integrity as though it had yet suffered no impairment through the intervention of external forces. This precisely is the mark of perfect style in each and every art, that it is able to remove the specific limitations of the art in question without thereby destroying its specific qualities, and through a wise use of its individual peculiarities is able to confer upon it a more general character. For nothing is more at variance with the concept of beauty than the notion of giving the psyche any definite bias. So much for the Council on Cultural Freedom. Truth is not something which, like actuality or the physical existence of things, can simply be received from without. It is something produced by our thinking faculty autonomously and by virtue of its freedom. And it is precisely this autonomy, this freedom, which is lacking in sensus man. It is therefore one of the most important tasks of education to subject man to form even in his purely physical life, and to make him aesthetic in every domain over which beauty is capable of extending her sway, since it is only out of the aesthetic, not out of the physical state, that the moral can develop. Because in his experience the sense drive precedes the moral, he assigns to the law of necessity a beginning in time too, a positive origin, and through this most unfortunate of all errors, makes the unchangeable and eternal in himself into an accidental product of the transient. He persuades himself into regarding the concept of right and wrong as statutes introduced by some will, not as something valid in themselves for all eternity. Whether it then be that reason has not yet made its voice heard in man, and that the physical still rules in him with blind necessity, or that reason has not yet sufficiently purified itself of sense, and the moral is still at the service of the physical, in either case, the sole principle prevailing within him is a material one, and man is, at least in his ultimate tendency, a creature of sense, with this sole difference that in the first case he is an animal void of reason, in the second an animal endowed with reason. What he is meant to be, however, is neither of these. He is meant to be a human being. Nature is not meant to rule him exclusively, nor reason to rule him conditionally. Both these systems of rule are meant to coexist in perfect independence of each other, and yet in perfect concord. And this can only be attained by beauty. The pleasures of the senses we enjoy merely as individuals, without the genus which is immanent within us having any share in them at all. Hence, we cannot make the pleasures of sense universal, because we are unable to universalize our own individuality. The pleasures of knowledge we enjoy merely as genus, and by carefully removing from our judgment at all trace of individuality. Hence, we cannot make the pleasures of reason universal, because we cannot eliminate traces of individuality from the judgments of others as we can from our own. beauty alone do we enjoy at once as an individual and as genus, i.e. as representatives of the human genus. And this again is the prerequisite for a society, for a nation to obtain also political freedom to act from this human genus. And finally, he asks, does such a state of aesthetic semblance really exist? And if so, where it is to be found? As a need, it exists in every finely attuned or beautiful soul. As a realized fact, we are likely to find it, like the pure church and the pure republic, only in some few chosen circles where conduct is governed not by some soulless imitation of the manners and morals of others, but by the aesthetic nature we have made our own, where men make their way with undismayed simplicity and tranquil innocence through even the most involved and complex situations, free alike of the compulsion to infringe the freedom of others in order to assert their own, as of the necessity to shed their dignity in order to manifest grace. And with this, I yield back.
That was great, Uwe. No, that was really good. And I just really appreciated this introductory sort of. I didn't realize you were going to go through each of the individual letters and their essential characters to give people a thumbnail sketch, but it's wonderful that you did that to sort of set a context and a scaffolding, because if people do want to plunge into these letters, it will be a challenge. And without that top-down mapping in the mind, it'll be very easy to get lost and discouraged. So I love that you did that. It brought to my mind the remarks of Theodor Adorno, one of the misanthropic anti-Schillers who worked with the CIA in forming the Congress for Cultural Freedom, and who said that anybody who thinks to write beautiful poetry after Auschwitz is insane. It is impossible. And then he also wrote about how his new ideal for art should be to help us embrace total decay by forcing a coexistence of the irrational insanity on the one side and the petrification of stasis on the other, of one being constant change and one being constant no change, that Adorno and those who worked with him at the Congress for Cultural Freedom aspired true art to be a harmonization of these two apparent contradictions, which was through ugliness. So they also, like Schiller, wanted to harmonize these two apparent coexisting things of constant change and no change, but rather than do it through beauty and truth and freedom, they wanted to do it through ugliness, which is an interesting sleight of hand that we have shaping our current world. And it's good to have that as a contrast to appreciate the beauty of what you just did, and what Schiller was aspiring to bring to the world. So thank you so much. And I know we have a few comments and questions. The first comment I'm going to give over to Quan Le. Quan, it's all yours.
Well, first I want to say, Uwe, that your presentation is absolutely outstanding, dazzling, extraordinary. And I gave you all my attention because I already read the Aesthetical letters by Schiller, but I would say that your presentation gave a kind of synthetic overall understanding of that map to the epistemological development precisely, okay? Because after all, your presentation of the Schiller Aesthetical letters was within the context, as you propose, of Platonic philosophy and Confucianist philosophy. And I'm sorry to impose a little bit my own conception on your presentation, but it's not the first time I show it to the Rising Tides Foundation. But that image of the king, okay, the vertical line with the three horizontal lines is exactly what you presented for me, okay? um, I took note at the same time, even I gave you all my attention. When you started with the 10 letter about the sensual rational nature, it is exactly that epistemological development, that the transcendental way will lead us out of the phenomenal existence, a firm foundation of knowledge that nothing can shake. Okay, so that vertical line in the character, Chinese character Wang, is that precisely that unchanged, timeless reality, and the manifesting horizontal lines is precisely for the time dimension. And since you were also referring to the I Ching, I want to say that the Chinese character Yi in I Ching, most of the time, is translated as the book of change. Okay, so E, one of the meaning of E is change, of course. But the other meaning of E that not many people know is unchange. Okay, so E is at the same time time and timelessness. And I would say that if I have the possibility to change the translation of the I Ching as the book of change for something else, I would have proposed being and time, or Sein und Zeit, as you know in German. Mm-hmm. And there's already a book in German called Sein und Zeit, but it would give rise to confusion. But I think that Sein und Zeit, it would be the true translation of the I Ching and not the book of change, because the book of change is only one dimension of the I Ching. And precisely in your presentation of today, that is absolutely clear that you, once again, is the German way to state the character, the Chinese character Wang, meaning that perfect complementarity, harmonic complementarity and not opposition between the time and timelessness. So the supreme intelligence as something changing within him in time, and giving reality to the reality within, and subjecting to the law of necessity the reality without. Okay, so I wrote plenty of stuff that you read from the letters, because, and confusing the spheres of operations, okay, of time and timelessness. If you don't confuse the sphere of operation of timelessness and time, that would be here, it's maybe clumsy as a choice of words, but operationally, in the education, precisely, because after all, everything is about education, educare, to bring forth what is from within. And today you were talking extensively about beauty, that is the first timeless form that has to be brought from within, because as you know, that is the most dangerous and most difficult step. Once you are in beauty, goodness and truth will come spontaneously. So education is, I absolutely agree with Schiller, is first and foremost to bring forth that timeless form of beauty within. I just want to take 10 seconds to give a pedantic remark. You were speaking of the duties of the gentleman. I would, since I don't like very much the word duty, I would suggest the endeavor of the gentleman. I stop here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Quan. Uwe, do you want to throw back anything on that point, or do I go into the next question?
No, thank you very much. Please go into the next.
Okay. Stephen, where are you?
Right here. Hi, Uwe. Thank you very much for a very beautiful lecture. I really enjoyed that. And just as a request, because those letters are so profound, would it be possible to get a copy of your presentation, maybe through Matt or the Rising Tide, just so we could review it? Because there's some very fantastic material there. In terms of the actual question, I'm struck by how simple yet how profound some of the concepts are that Schiller is dealing with. So idea and form and so on and so forth. And I guess my question is, when you were exploring Schiller and getting into this, were there some of these that were more difficult to assimilate and really grasp than others? Were there some that resonated with you more? I mean, those really profound, essential philosophical pillars to what he's describing to me sound so important. And I just was wondering what your thoughts are on those.
Right. So thank you for your question. To be honest, there were many ways in which I had laid out this lecture of today, because there are so many angles to this, because of the many concepts and the similarity of some terms as opposed to their specific meaning. So you have the essential nature of man, you have the drive, you have the character and stuff, and it is quite, or it can be quite challenging and confusing even, and it was when I started to read it, and I've spent 6 months on permanent revisiting this work in German, because it was so dense. And I will admit, the way I finally managed to get an understanding, so an emotional understanding of my rational uptake of this, was by interchanging lectures from especially from Kwan, here the various lectures I mentioned, on my daily walks with my dog, with then also readings of there's one very good reading of the letters in German. So I have it while being out in nature, in the forest or wherever, that I revisit it, and in this way I finally got a grasp of what I wanted to do, i.e., to relay my understanding or my impression of the deep similarity between Schiller and the classical concept of the I Ching, for example, and Plato. So this is something where I can only say it will take patience and dedication to revisit it, in order to build your own understanding. At least this was how I finally got to where I was today.
Super. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have Monty, then Richard. So Monty.
Yeah, thank you very much. You are much appreciated. Just one comment, and I'd like to ask a question in reference. I was impressed that at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, reference was made to something of a higher ordering, which I was very much impressed by, and it was brought forth by Pepe Escobar and the remarks of Sergei Glazius, in which they're not just referring to a multipolar world. What they're talking about now is a civilizational, multipolar, harmonic world order. And my comments in reference to this on different forums was that I'm impressed by the fact that this seems to embrace the ideas of Schiller, of Confucius, of Kepler, and Plato. In other words, this higher ideal. And in reference to that, I wonder if you could comment on this idea of a higher ordering or a higher drive principle of what Schiller referred to as a world citizen in relationship to being a patriot. In other words, we might have the national citizen in an elementary form, which we identify with now, but in his, I'm not that much familiar with it, but I believe Schiller represented this idea of a world citizen and patriotism. Could you comment on that, please?
Well, yeah, I will try to give a comment. Just yesterday, I read an article from the German from the German Office for Political Education. So it's a state-funded institution, and you want to be really, really cautious with that kind of information. And they had an article about Schiller and the concept of nation, and and how this concept was outdated today, and how Schiller was, well, they recognized that he was not a fascist, or not even paving way for that, but that he was being hijacked by the fascists and stuff like that. So this is, of course, quite political in the narrow sense of weaponizing the material. I understood that Schiller indeed, I mean, he took pride in being a citizen of the French Republic, so therefore patriotism was not in conflict with his universal citizenry, which he felt in being a humanist and being a lover of the human nature, as clearly he has said he was, and so therefore I think it is something which makes a lot of sense to really take some time and spend some effort in making this clear, especially today, that the whole concept of nationalism has been completely hijacked and perverted in terms of what's the term in English, chauvinist and xenophobic ideas of some political actors, of course, but nation. And this is also something which I want to pay tribute to the work of the Rising Tide Foundation, especially, but also of the Schiller Institute, where I have, as a German, I've been led to really get in touch with my cultural heritage and the historical development of that only through those international institutions, because it's not something which I had been brought in contact with, or even introduced to in a systematic way. And this is I think indicative of the problems which especially is Germany going through these days, with a complete lack of any sense of patriotic inclination and attitude.
On that note, I just find it fascinating, and I guess I took for granted how privileged I was to encounter the ideas of Schiller sort of coming at it as a blank slate, trying to figure things out. And I had encountered the Schiller Institute many years ago, and that was where Schiller, as a personality, was first introduced to me, and so I was blown away, and I was just so envious of the Germans who had been able to read the original Schiller writings. And I figured, I took it for granted how underappreciated he was. And it was only when I began to organize and speak to more and more German people that I began to be surprised that, wow, nobody really understands Schiller. And I've had yourself, Irene Eckert, many other German friends of mine who have said, I didn't know, I had no idea. So can I ask you, like, before you started plunging into a serious investigation of Schiller with your political consciousness now where it is, what was the common conception that you had encountered growing up as a German of Schiller? Like, what was your idea of what he was? If somebody had asked you, what do you feel about Schiller? What are your opinions?
He was a dead old white man, basically. He was a romanticist, writing about outdated concepts of chivalry or love or cabal. I mean, the whole word cabal was, it was totally devoid any meaning in terms of even a political discussion, right? So this is something which it was boring. I mean, we read the Robbers, and we read Cabal and Love in high school, but without of course, yeah, we also learned geometry without Kepler and Pythagoras. So therefore, it is something which is completely out of thin air, no way of getting in touch with in which tradition this intellectual work has been, and so therefore this is especially true for Schiller. And with Schiller, I do believe that there is, of course, a deliberate attempt behind this to try to take away the power which he especially has been able to express, and which he also took great he sacrificed a lot in speaking out, as opposed to, for example, Goethe. I'm very intrigued by the friendship between Schiller and Goethe, given the fact that Goethe did, apparently he did a lot for Schiller, but he stayed, below the radar in terms of his own exposure.
Thank you. Yeah, something similar was done to Shakespeare for the English as well. I find there's maybe they don't think of Shakespeare as an idealist and utopian the way they do for the Germans think of Schiller, but there was a similar misunderstanding that was consciously created in the minds of the English speaking world around Shakespeare too. So not a surprise. Richard, are you there? You are.
Yeah, I really liked the idea of the play drive, and it made me look differently at Irish culture. I live here in Ireland, and there in the Irish characters there is a lot of play drive and a lot of aesthetics, the valuing of aesthetic, music and art and literature. So I think that has something to do with why Ireland is pretty much popular with everybody, Thank you.
Thank you. It's very popular with me.
Yeah, it's true. The Irish are not known for their didactic treaties, but rather a lot of storytelling, right? Jokes, storytelling, and yeah, it's very playful in that sense. How you can really transform and change people's understanding of something a lot more through a story than you can through a sort of just a didactic presentation. So the Irish are really good at that.
And teasing a lot,
yeah,
which they call slagging,
Yeah, right.
And, best friends will say the most insulting things and laugh,
Well, it helps you to like break free, I think, of the domination of literalisms, because you can't be a literalist rigid person if you're able to be teased and give a tease. You sort of are able to be a little bit more loose, which you need to be if you're going to be functional in this world. So yeah, very true. Good point. Schiller, I'm sure, would approve. We had a question from my mother. She asked me to ask you, there's a text that you referenced that was difficult to find in most translations. Do you recall which letter that was very difficult to find? Or was it the letters as a whole, like all the letters, the aesthetical letters themselves? Were you saying that those were difficult to find as English translations?
Actually, it was a text. It was a text, I think, around letter 12, like 11 or 12. You were saying there was one portion that was difficult to find. It's okay, never mind. I'll watch it again with my mom and we'll find it again.
Are you asking me?
Yeah. There was a text you referenced. You said that text was hard to find in most of the translations. And I think it was around letter 11 or 12.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where I made this comment, but what I wanted to say is that there are many versions of translations, which I found had some differences in terms of its translation from the German into the English. But I also had to concede that the understanding of the German in itself is a challenge in some parts. So therefore, I'm not quite sure. I will also revisit the recording and maybe can then comment more specifically on it.
It's okay. I'll be watching it again with my mom.
On that.
So I'll take note.
Thank you, Mom. On that point, as a German speaker, I've only read the English translations that of these letters. Do you find that we lose a lot, or is it still bearable, the translations that you were encountering in English, or am I really deprived? I'm asking, do I need to learn German?
No, you're not. No, the translations are quite good. I mean, they differ in some translate drive as impulse, and of course this is something, or the concept of form and idea sometimes is difficult to translate because the German already is not really precise in this way. But in general, the translations are quite remarkable. You sent me one which was just images, so I couldn't use it for easy copy paste. I had to find another one from one of your. I think yesterday in your Substack you had a cover from an English professor who translated it. And this translation was quite good because it has really both versions on each side next to one another. I used this one for my quotes here, and so therefore there are some minor things which I could also think about having a different way of translating it, but in general it's very, very good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Gordon, I see your digital hand is up.
Yeah, I have a question for Uwe. Since you said that you have been introduced late in your life, well, not late in your life, but later in your life, about the aesthetic letters by Schiller, you probably know that he wrote those letters because he was very disappointed by the behavior of the people during the French Revolution. Okay, I think that what he said, I don't remember the exact words, but the idea was that a great event has been managed by small people or something like that.
Yes.
And what during your education in Germany, during your high school or the equivalent of high school in Germany, because I don't know the German educational system, how the French Revolution has been presented to the children or the teenagers?
Well, yeah, the French Revolution is something which is it plays a role in high school in terms of presenting the French culture, and later it also plays a role in discussing philosophical ideas, especially Rousseau, Montesquieu, and then John Locke, David Hume, and those kind of thinkers, where not much discussion about other forms of or ideas is given. So there is also one tendency already quite visible in depicting the French Revolution. What completely lacks with the French Revolution being taught is the importance of the American Revolution, and this is something which is a grave, how do you say, error and want in German education. No one speaks about the American Revolution, really. We have it as a minor footnote in terms of, yeah, there was this revolution in America and the USA has this history, but all we learn is no representation without taxation, and that's it, and nothing about the philosophical, economical humanist background of the American founding fathers. Cotton Mather is a name I've never heard before. Of course, Benjamin Franklin is known, but so Le Marquis de Lafayette, for example, no, it doesn't play a role. So the French Revolution is portrayed as some nice idea which failed because it was mishandled, and basically that's what happens when you let radicals have their way. So don't even dare to really question the government. Basically, I mean, this is not really how they teach it, but that would be a caricature of the way I understand it. Looking back today, it's completely void of any deeper meaning in terms of universal history, in terms of how Schiller explained. No one really reads Schiller's lecture on universal history, which should, of course, be one core piece of every high school history class in the first place, to really understand how to go about in studying history, i.e. in understanding the events in constant reappraisal of philosophical ideas and attempts to, live your humanity, but it's not done this way.
Yeah, myself as well. I mean, from a Canadian educational standpoint, I had zero emotional connection whatsoever to the American Revolution, except that it was something that I acknowledged happened, but there was zero, if anything, maybe a little bit of a disdain that I felt inside of my emotions because of that having happened in 1776. But yeah, no appreciation. And similarly, from a French Canadian, zero connection to the French Revolution. That's sort of treated as something we also were told happened, but was completely separate as a phenomenon from the American Revolution. No connection to these two Republican revolutions around the same time. No connection. I didn't even know which one happened first, honestly. It's that bad. It's wild. So let's throw the last. Jenny says same thing here as a Montrealer. Jenny, you're in Montreal. Hey, we're gonna do an event soon. You should come. All right. Send me an email and I'll let you know about the details for the event. All right. Last question. We'll throw it to Jerry on Play Drive. Okay, Jerry, go.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks, Uwe. That was very educational. There is a lot to this class. I'm going to have to go back and watch yours about 2 or 3 times. There's so much in there from Schiller, because I've tried to read the aesthetic letters a number of times. It's very difficult to read. I'm sure translating it is even more difficult. That's got to be hard. But I really like the way you brought up this idea of the play drive, because I never really looked at it from that standpoint as, reconciling the other 2 main drives that Schiller talks about. And thinking about this idea of play drive, and I think Richard was talking about it too. The idea that popped into my mind was the idea of the pursuit of happiness. And I mean, we have to have the correct concept of happiness, not licentiousness, but, intellectual happiness, the Leibnizian sense of happiness. But do you see Schiller having a connection between this idea of play drive and the pursuit of happiness? That's my question, if you could answer it.
Oh, sure. And by the way, I also I did not mention it in this class particularly, but your recent class, no, I don't think it was recent, but it was one class which you gave, which I viewed on a train ride, was very instructive for me as well. So thank you for this. No, sure, he is directly I think referring to this Leibnizian way of understanding happiness. I cannot at this moment I cannot really give any more concrete word of it, but surely this issue, so play for him is definitely something which is not a materialistic play, win or lose. It is something which has to do with a higher concept of purpose, or maybe even not purpose in this way of dedication to something specific, but rather purpose in terms of we engage in this process because we know it is essential for us to progress in whatever and in our epistemological journey or so. And in this way, I think it can have also a meaning of purpose to pursue the play drive. But when I prepared this talk, I was for the moment I was thinking about also this, as I said, the charioteer image from Plato, where you have the black and the white horse, and the play drive being the charioteer, to rein in those two essential but also difficult powers if they be let loose. And another image for this was the and I don't know whether it is something you also have come across, but people who stutter, right? When they sing, they don't have these problems. So therefore, singing, beauty, music is a way to unleash or even to manage this form of physical or personal how do you say manifestation. I left it out because, as you can also now realize, I'm not quite, I have not quite gotten my head around what it is exactly, but it came to my mind that, and I had even a video which I downloaded, but I'm not going to play it now, where this issue of play for a deeper meaning, to achieve more progress on a path you're on, is something which relates, in my view, to what you mentioned about happiness, and also to this question of people overcoming their problem with stuttering. I'm sorry, I realize it's beginning to lose my capacity to command my English at this.
No, I mean, Uwe, it's always difficult, like, to wrap the structure of language around these types of unbounded ideas, but I think you've done a great job. And I've noticed that Marilyn Langlois, and I was about to wrap it up there, and I just looked at, I saw that there's these digital hands floating around. So you're gonna have to exercise a little bit more of your resilience. I know it's getting late for you up there in Germany. How do you have time for two last questions?
Sure, of course. Yeah.
Okay,
I mean, it's
right.
fun.
It's fun. Okay, good. It's fun. Good. Duty is fun. Yeah, proof of principle. Okay, so Marilyn and Morgan will round this out. So Marilyn, go for it.
Sure. Thank you, Uwe. Very, very interesting and very informative presentation. I too learned about Schiller in college studying German literature, but didn't really get anything of what he was really all about. So I appreciate your lecture and the work of the Rising Tide Foundation, bringing it to life for me. Anyway, I'm wondering, following up on the last question, when you talk about the play drive and beauty, where does love fit into it? And I ask this because, for example, I'm thinking of another really good contemporary historian, Daniele Ganser, who's a peace researcher and really tries to guide us through his study of contemporary history to our higher selves. And he talks about being driven by the values of truth, courage, and love. And another place I remember hearing the term love, which is kind of off the wall, but it sticks in my mind. The movie Amadeus, which was produced by Hollywood back in the early 80s about Mozart, has a scene in it in which the young Mozart is talking with these Italian, these establishment Italian musicians. And Mozart has this radical idea of wanting to do an opera in German. And they just laugh it off and say, oh, no, German is not the language of music or beauty or anything. You can't do that. And the young Mozart says, oh, but I want to have this opera incorporate German virtue. And they laugh at him and say, well, tell me, what is a German virtue? And his immediate response is love. So I'm asking you, how does love fit into this work of Schiller?
There are so many different qualities to the word love in German, which in other languages have specific vocabulary, right? I mean, Schiller definitely is full of love, of agape, right? So the brotherly love for the human species, for the divinity even in it. I must say I will have to look it up, but in my notes for today, I do have a passage where it is also expressively related to agape and to the Christian belief, even which is not what you have been asking, but so there's a deep, profound body of belief, I would say, of faith, even in Schiller, to my impression at least, which I can feel when I access his works, when I access Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which is of course an homage to Schiller again. So I'm not sure whether I've answered your question, but definitely to me this is something which is absolutely in line. Also with the play drive, but not necessarily reduced to this idea of play drive, because the play drive is it's just the necessity which has to be used and developed to fully develop the two essential human capacities of emotion and senses, and of reason, of rationality. So therefore, this is not necessarily something which corresponds to love, but Schiller's whole body of work deeply is full of love for me.
Cool. Morgan.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I thought it was great. It's, I'm not very familiar with Schiller, but when I did political science, probably about 15 years ago in university, I had to learn Plato. I read Plato very well, got an A in political philosophy, and then I just kept reading it my whole life, and I was already an artist. So developing Plato was very easy to connect to Schiller. I think that it's really necessary to kind of to bounce between the two, especially in relating it to the civilization and the nation, the politics that we live in. And I guess the biggest thing that comes to mind is the development of character. And some of these are virtues and exploration of our humanity and duty to humanity. And so, in order to do that, we need to get out of our senses, we need to get out of our turmoil, our politics, and really explore our imaginations to, imagine a better world. And so, I guess the biggest question I have would be, how do you see, the lack of truth telling in our politics today, and also our lack of duty to politics today? Because I think that two of those virtues are totally gone from our culture: the ability to tell the truth and the ability to value the truth, and also just the ability to have any duty to other people and care about other people.
Wow, thank you. Well, it's a very deep question with many aspects to it, and each of them I could speak for an hour at least. I mean, the issue of politics and truth and duty is, you're right, I agree, it is striking how this has gone south, as they say. However, on the other hand, I'm not comfortable anymore in giving an assessment as to whether it has been essentially different before, at least with regards to German politics, which I know better, because there is a lot of deception in that right from the beginning, at least from the beginning after the Second World War. So the building up of Germany, denazification and stuff, this has all been a lot of show and theater, basically, on some level. And so the question of truth, you can say, has been lacking right from the get-go, although there have been many people who had a dedication to service, I think, and this is something which I would also, with respect to the question previously, in terms of duty, I would prefer to speak of service as opposed to duty, because with regards to Schiller, duty is quite problematic, as I've tried to make clear. Duty, so something which arises from reason, but has an obligation included, will lead very easily, or can lead to emotional subjugation, right? That you feel inclined, that you feel obliged to do something which you'd rather not do. And Schiller, with the sublime concept of the sublime, is able to develop this into something which you want to do, even though it is painful. And so it is in service and in love, which is also what was asked previously, that one wants to do this, and therefore it is not compulsion. It is not something which suppresses something, and this sense of service, this dedication to the Republic, to the common cause, right, is something which is definitely lacking today with regards to Germany and Europe. And I can see it also be in need, or how do you say, lacking in other parts of the world. I hope this answers your question.
Sí. you give a presentation on Schiller's Aesthetical letters, and people look up to you as the holder of the keys to the secrets of the universe. But it's true in the sense that you did a lot of work, and so with work comes insights, and so this is expected. No, I think this was great. Monty has an observation I just read here in the chat. Play as a metaphor for solving a paradox, and Monty just shared how he was reminded that Max Planck and Einstein played classical music together when being incapable when confronting a logical problem in the scientific domain that they couldn't resolve. They would play classical music, often Mozart, and then return back to their problem with all sorts of new impulses and instincts that would help resolve the dissonance of the paradox that was holding them back on the logical domain. So again, yeah, there's so many different points. There's so many examples of great scientists who made their discoveries self-consciously through their deep connection and immersion with rigorous classical music and art. It's beautiful. It's beautiful, and it's tragic to see what's been removed from our awareness in current society intentionally. I don't think that one can make an argument that this happened by accident in order to keep these insights away from our own ability to wield them for ourselves and for humanity. So that's by design. So I really appreciate immensely how you've been able to help unleash these insights once again and give us all access to them so that we can start working through these illegal verboten idea content and really make them our own in the current world. Quan, I'm looking at the digital hand. Did you just put that up?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. All right, Quan. All right, you are officially now going to round this out. Quan, go.
Oh no, I wouldn't. I just want to say something lasting 10 seconds. I just want to say that what Max Planck and Albert Einstein were doing, that they went into timelessness and they came back in time. Okay, so we all need to learn how to go into timelessness and to navigate between timelessness and time. That's one. And two, I would like to offer a small comment on the notion of love in Schiller's work. I think, I don't remember the letter, maybe it's number 3, 4, or 5. I think that he wrote somewhere in his letters that the most beautiful piece of art is to create a political structure that is managed by justice. And I think that creating a political structure that is managed by justice is the greatest proof of love.
Wow, yeah. Thanks.
Well said, Quan. I think that's a perfect resonant way to end today's composition. I just re-entered Uwe's Substack in the chat box for those who might have missed it. Check out Uwe, subscribe, follow it. There's some wonderful research material in there that I highly encourage people to both check out and to share. Also, this will be in the description box of this video, like I said at the beginning. Uwe, thank you so much. Next week, we're going to have, I believe it's Adam Sedia, or maybe it's David Gosselin, but I'm not too sure. But it'll be something good. Next Sunday, 2 p.m., same time. Uwe, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining on this Sunday.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for staying out so long with me. Bye-bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Cheers, everyone.
Dankeschön.